Welcome to Oh God, What Now? I'm Dorian Linsky. On today's show, a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has brought hope to the families of hostages and prisoners on both sides, but can it lead to a lasting solution to the conflict in Gaza? Scholar on Israel and Palestine, Yair Wallach, joins us to discuss what's next for the region. Plus, Richard Tice's Reform UK is in the spotlight over claims that Tory Deputy Chair Lee Anderson was offered a substantial cash prize to defect. It gets a lot of attention, especially on GB News, but is Reform just a paper tiger? And in the extra bit for Patreon backers, a diplomatic row 200 years in the making. Rishi Sunak cancelled a meeting with the Greek PM at the last minute over the fate of the Parthenon marbles, an issue that weirdly does not rival health or the economy in surveys of voter priorities. Is this a Britain problem or a Rishi problem? Let's meet the panel. Hello to commentator Alex Andreou.
Hi, Tory. I can't believe you didn't say the extra bit for Parthenon backers. It was right there.
Just left it on the table for you to pick up. It's rightfully a Greek joke. You've been glued to the COVID inquiry this week. Matt Hancock won't appear until after we record this episode, unfortunately, but we have seen Michael Gove and the Metro mayors, Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan. What did they reveal? I
am still shook by the biggest revelation of them all, Tory, and quite literally just before I left for the studio, in which Wednesday afternoon's witness confirmed his name as Dominic Rene Raab. I need to talk about this at length. I won't. Don't worry.
Well, if we'd known that,
we'd have done that as topic
when he was
one.
Like, we're going to walk away, Renee, it would have been a great pun.
The standout session was Gove's, the first senior politician to accept explicitly that errors were made that resulted in the loss of life and apologise to bereaved families.
He's actually quite good at apologising. Like he has a track record.
Yeah, it was a sort of surprising, refreshingly honest start. It didn't last, let me tell you, because he basically filibustered the rest of his appearance. By the end, I genuinely had no idea what his answer had been to 9 out of 10 questions, or even if he had answered them at all. He just constantly went on theoretical tangents to give context or whatever, to the point where both the Lady Hallett, the justice, and counsel were just fed up with him. Like, she quite obviously had a little cough signal for he's off again, stop him, and counsel would go, okay.
So was he there for vibes rather than facts, that he wanted to present himself as the sort of a decent fellow who acknowledged mistakes were made?
I think he treated it as a Laura Kuenssberg interview rather than a public inquiry that's trying to get to stuff that might be quite useful for the future, and didn't want to be pinned down on anything. But the vibes, such as they were that it was him and Dominic Cummings that were basically the lockdown hawks, pushing for early and hard. And that, I think, is quite revealing, and it sets up who is to come, Sunak, Johnson, and Hancock, in quite a difficult way, I think, because like the people who were pushing for a lockdown have already revealed themselves, and because we know the lockdowns were late, it's like the decision makers coming, there is a presumptive understanding that they were the ones that were kind of resisting that and pushing back against it.
Rachel Cunliffe is Associate Political Editor at The New Statesman. Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
In an article for the Wall Street Journal, Liz Truss has called for America to return to conservative leadership in 2024, which effectively means Donald Trump. To me, she seems like Theresa May in reverse. Like, ever since leaving office, she's become more and more right-wing. What is her game?
Well, if you speak to people who know her well or have known her throughout her career, they will tell you that she's actually been remarkably consistent in her views and ideology in this kind of quite radical free market conservatism. It's just that she was able, as a minister under various Conservative prime ministers, to not hide it, but kind of present a different side of herself. So they will tell you that this is the true Liz Truss. But I can totally see what you mean, because it is kind of normal for high-profile politicians, sort of leaders, to toe the party line and try and present themselves as being quite sort of strong and authoritative. And then when they leave office, they're much more open to nuance, and they will consider issues in sort of different ways. And Theresa May is sort of reinventing herself as this strangely moderate liberal conservative, and if you look at her record, you're like, what?
And they just generally
May?
become more sort of human. You know, I know he was not Prime Minister, famously, but Ed Miliband, you know, became vastly more likeable. Liz Truss does not seem to be going for likeable.
But I don't think her goal is to become the elder stateswoman grandee. Her goal...
We'll get a podcast.
Well, I feel like charismatic speaking isn't really her thing. Pork markets. Anyway, although she has had voice coaching. I saw her at Conservative Party conference when she drew this huge crowd, and her delivery has vastly improved from when she was Prime Minister. But I think what the goal is to build this cross-border, global, free market conservative movement, and there is real money in that, or available from the big US think tanks. And there's this idea that liberalism across the world, sort of social democratic politics, has failed, and you need this right-wing sort of libertarian, but also very conservative movement to kind of sweep all that to one side. And she's got a lot of fans in the US on that branch of that wing of radical politics. So that's her aim, to be part of the think tank network that exists, to raise a lot of money for that, and to choose a champion who will then be able to pick up from Rishi Sunak after the next election.
Right, there's money and there's a claim in America for someone like her.
Yeah.
Not so much a claim here.
But also that wing of people in America obsessed with Margaret Thatcher and a conservative woman who has had speech coaching, which Liz Truss obviously has. It's quite appealing to them.
Our guest this week is a social and cultural historian of modern Palestine and Israel and a reader in Israeli studies at SOAS. Yair Wallach, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
I found you like an essential voice on the conflict since October the 7th. Given that we're in a period of furious polarisation, I find that you've managed to achieve quite a rounded view. What's it like in that space? Are there a lot of people you find in that space where I suppose I would say sort of sympathetic to the, you know, Israeli left, on that kind of space, very much not Netanyahu?
On Twitter, you mean?
Well, yeah, and both.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely there are, you know, and Palestinian commentators who have been quite clear, you know, in taking a universalist, humanistic position here, while, you know, clearly concentrating on the suffering in Gaza. But so there is, you know, there's a lot of other stuff, of course, and it's, the discourse is terrible and vitriolic. But also, you know, there are the people that I think make sense and maintain some kind of moral consistency. So that's kind of, I guess, what keeps me going.
Yeah, they're the people to look for.
Before we start, a couple of quick reminders. You can still get 10% off our fabulous merchandise at podmarket.co.uk. So head over there for those sought-after hardline centrist T-shirts, tofu-eating wokerati mugs, the must-wear garment for 2024, the Retro Remaniacs Hate to Say We Told You So T-shirt, and much, much more. That's podmarket.co.uk. Discount lasts till Sunday. And if you missed tickets for our sold-out live show on Wednesday 13th December, or you live in not London, have no fear. We are streaming the show live exclusively and free for Patreons. Search for Patreon, Oh God What Now, or follow the link in the show notes to sign up and get the link.
The first pause in hostilities in the current war between Israel and Hamas began on Friday and is continuing as we record on Wednesday afternoon. Dozens of hostages and prisoners on both sides have been freed so far, and Gazans have been receiving much-needed humanitarian aid. Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant has said that when fighting recommences, its, quote, strength will be greater and it will take place throughout the entire strip. But some observers have said that the military operation will be hard to resume on the same scale. We're lucky to have an expert on the show to talk about this and much more. Yeah. Various people have claimed credit for negotiating this pause, including the Biden administration, pro-ceasefire protesters, Qatar. How did it happen? Who has made this happen?
It's clear that this kind of deal was discussed even before the ground invasion. So the contours of the deal remain the same in terms of how many Palestinian prisoners would be released and which Israeli hostages would be released. There were maybe details that were not finalized, and it's not clear, if Hamas held out or Israel held out. What is clear, though, I think that the Israeli military wanted to have the ground invasion, and only when they achieved at least most of what they were planning in the first stage, and with the accumulation of pressure from the families, I think that's when the deal became possible. It might be that Hamas are under greater pressure because of losses. That's what the Israeli military is saying. I can't say if it's true or not.
Has Biden been effective in his diplomacy, do you think?
In terms of what he wanted, I think so. The aims were to prevent a further escalation with Lebanon, and I think he was able to achieve that. And then to be able to keep a close eye on what Israel is doing and kind of prevent sudden. So around the Shifa hospital, they prevented fighting within the hospital. But of course, many people are very critical of the administration because of the huge toll of civilian casualties in Gaza. And it seems that was beyond what they expected. And it is absolutely atrocious.
There's some semantic confusion around the word ceasefire, I've noticed. Most people mean a permanent end to hostilities rather than this temporary pause. How does the Israeli public feel about the war? Like how fully behind a kind of resumption of hostilities are there, given what's happened so far?
The problem is that there's a contradiction between the two war aims. On the one hand, Israel public wants the hostages back. And, the more hostages come back, the more there is a greater desire to see all of them back. But that means some kind of negotiation. That means some longer ceasefire or even permanent ceasefire. Is resolutely behind the idea that Hamas cannot be allowed to control the Strip anymore. I think there's no doubt on that question. And, it may take time, but on a fundamental level, I can't see Israeli public coming to terms with Hamas staying in power in Gaza. And that, again, there's a clear contradiction between these two things, or a question of priorities. And if the priority is the hostages, then that means pausing the military operation.
Is there serious disquiet about the scale of the civilian death toll in Israel?
Not at all. I have to say that that's been a process that's been going through, each of these wars, the kind of attention to Palestinian casualties drops, but especially after the 7th of October, anyone arguing for compassion or for actually being aware of the toll on the Palestinians their reactions are really hostile. Yes, and also Israeli media does not show images of Palestinian casualties. It's almost impossible to see them on Israeli television. So no.
Alex, you mentioned to me that some of Netanyahu's critics say that he's effectively lost control of the military operation and will find it hard to go back to the previous approach after this. Why?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's meant as a criticism. I think it's a sort of practical comment, as it were. And I think the first reason is to do with the psychology of the international community, because while most of Israel's allies initially, in the shock of what happened on October the 7th, gave it maximum leeway, it became clear that this began to be walked back sort of inch by inch, almost instantly. And pretty much all its allies have charted how they see this thing going in a general direction, right? As in war, some hostage releases to build trust, small pauses, longer pause, ceasefire, negotiation. And so it feels to me almost impossible that there would be widespread endorsement of going back 2 or 3 steps in that process. I think emotionally, for Israel's allies, it would be very difficult to go for it again. I think the second reason is a sort of almost physiological one, because I understand from military experts that it's really quite difficult in very short order to send an army into this kind of action in terms of building up their adrenaline and that kind of thing, and then take them down from that heightened state for 5 or 6 days and then send them back into battle. And the third, probably most important one, I think, is a legal one, because there is a question of proportionality. You know, what was proportional in terms of international law as a response to that massive thing that happened on the 7th of October is not necessarily proportional 40 days later when things have quietened down and there's not that same sense of immediate threat, right? I don't think in terms of international law you could make the same urgency argument. We're not in the red mist of war anymore here, right? We are in a much cooler frame of mind, and justifying the sort of civilian casualties we have seen in that cooler frame of mind, I think, to me, feels like a really difficult argument to make legally.
Let's try and explain to listeners a bit more about what kind of government we're dealing with there. That before the war, there were massive protests in Israel against Netanyahu and his very right-wing cabinet. A lot of unease internationally about West Bank settlers who seem completely out of control with the state's blessing. I mean, obviously, we've had Likud government since the 70s, on and off. Is this the most extreme government Israel has ever had?
I mean, absolutely. There's no question.
Not close.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear. It includes Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are, openly calling for ethnic cleansing, and they're, in the most explicit terms. And large parts of the Likud itself is speaking in these terms. So, there's no doubt. It is a very extreme government, and the things that they have been talking about and giving cover to in the West Bank are the most serious in a long time.
And I wonder, therefore, what kind of pressure are they susceptible to when people talk about, what the US should do, or the UK or other countries put pressure on Netanyahu for a ceasefire? How because they don't seem that pliable.
It should be said, once, a bit after the war started, the, centrist element joined, and they are dominant in the war cabinet. Netanyahu is not leading the military effort. It's basically the military and these ministers in cabinet. He's not in control. And what happens in the war will be negotiated between the US and the Israeli military. So for good and for bad, Netanyahu is not in the lead. And similarly, I think that the extreme right elements within the government also have no impact on where the war is going. They do have impact on what is happening in the West Bank and within Israel, and then they are causing damage.
Because conventional wisdom says that a war favours a struggling leader. It unites the nation and so on. Polls suggest very much otherwise. What are Netanyahu's prospects? Is it that he's only going to stay in office while the war is ongoing because they wouldn't want to replace him, or is he finished sooner or later?
I mean, I think it's very difficult to see how he's not finished. I mean, first of all, this was the most devastating disaster in Israel's history in 75 years. So it's hard to see any prime minister surviving that. But he's seen as responsible in so many ways. He was the architect of the strategy of containing Hamas in this kind of hostile accommodation, very explicitly designed to prevent negotiations, to prevent any kind of two-state solution. He said it very clearly. And the idea was that Hamas can be tamed and can be kept under control. That proved disastrous. He's also, in the last year, pushed a highly divisive judicial reform, which tore the Israeli public. And he was warned by the Israeli intelligence that this is seen as a huge opportunity for Israel's enemies and that he should reconsider. And he didn't. And that's out in the open. So again, he's seen as responsible. He has not, since the 7th of October, he's almost in a shock. He's not able to formulate any kind of empathetic response to the Israeli public. He's hardly met any families that were affected of casualties, hardly met any hostage families, given no interviews to Israeli media one-on-one. He's given quite a few to American networks, but not to Israeli ones. He's seen as almost missing in action. And it's, he's also not built for this. He's a populist leader built on division and incitement and culture wars. He cannot play the unifier. That's not him. And we can see him very clearly. So all of this, it's almost certain that it'll be enormous rage and anger towards him once the fighting subsides. Everybody expects that.
And obviously there's a fear, about that he could be replaced by somebody worse. I wonder, will he sort of bring down those extremists in the cabinet with him? Or is there a chance that you could have somebody even further to the right replacing him?
I can't see that. I think the most likely is elections, and the most likely outcome is Benny Gantz becoming prime minister. He's a centrist, The right wing also is to some extent, hit by this because they're seen, at least some of the figures were seen as kind of partly responsible because they pushed for this highly divisive judicial reform. Some of them will probably, Itamar Ben-Gvir will probably survive this, but Smotrich, it's not clear if he survives this politically. He might. Currently in the polls, he's not pushing. He's on the threshold of going into the Knesset, so he might be damaged. I think the right wing will be significantly reduced, at least if we trust the current polls.
Rachel, thinking about the international reaction, I read an interesting piece by Josh Marshall of Talking Points memo about the problem of spectator syndrome, that there's a lot of people outside the region who care passionately in one direction or another, but they have no influence, and therefore they channel their energies into arguments that don't matter. Most recently, there's been a threat to boycott Stranger Things because the actor Noah Schnapp declared Zionism is sexy. And there's lots of examples like that of various sort of brands or celebrities. Do you think that is basically that it's all displacement activity, but very sort of toxic displacement activity? Does any of this reaction outside Israel make a difference?
I think there are two different things going on there. One is about celebrity culture and what we have come to expect of our celebrities, particularly ones who have big fan bases like Stranger Things, but to choose a completely different topic and show that this is not just about this particular issue. Taylor Swift fans wrote a long letter saying that, she'd betrayed them by having the wrong boyfriend and they were going to boycott her for that. There was an actress who I can't remember. There was an Instagram picture of her smoking, and that was apparently a betrayal of her fans. Internet culture has created this idea that if we engage with popular culture and we buy the music or we stream the shows, then somehow those actors or those celebrities owe us something, and they owe us some sort of ideological purity, and if we don't like it, we should boycott the show. And I think it's become quite unhealthy with celebrity culture, and I think that's something that we can probably pick up in all kinds of political issues. But specifically on this, I have felt really unsettled by how what is going on in Israel and Gaza has become kind of memeified internationally, and there are very complex geopolitical issues at play that we're talking about here. But a lot of the discourse, particularly on social media, is very binary, and in a way, the Palestinian cause has been associated with climate justice. I think people who have become very used to picking a side on any kind of culture war, politics issue, and have transferred that I am on the right side to this, which is much more complicated and has much bigger consequences. I mean, you can't say, I'm thinking about Greta Thunberg and the row over, well, firstly, the row over her getting involved in all this at all, but then again, the backlash because she had a cuddly toy octopus, and apparently that was said to be an anti-Semitic symbol. We saw something similar as well with University Challenge. It was weird. Right? It was really weird. It was a contestant on University Challenge who was wearing colours that in certain light looked a little bit like the Palestinian flag, and they had the octopus mascot, and this was apparently a big BBC conspiracy, and people pointed out that this was filmed back in March, and it's not that. But
like the Christmas advert with the
lights
allegedly burning Palestinian colours, and
it's just what is going is. I mean, it bears saying again, I think, that there are a lot of people out there who are struggling with their mental health, and that social media does bring the very worst out in people like that. And I think that I feel that encourages me to take a compassionate approach when someone comes at me with some like totally weird stuff. But this has been very strange. I about a week ago, I said something which I consider quite innocuous, I guess. I said, a permanent ceasefire depends on trust. And the only way to build trust is via a series of pauses that are observed. So come on, guys, let's not argue. And I swear I had 100 messages going literally, you genocidal centrist C word. Why not just say that you love seeing dead brown babies? Like hundreds of tweets like that. And I struggle to, where is this coming from?
Well, yeah, obviously I'm not naive about, how people feel about this issue. And I know the Palestinian cause has been sort of integral to the left since, the international left since like the 1970s. And yet still I have been shocked by all the kind of, sort of morbid symptoms, I suppose. Have you been surprised, or is this what you would expect when this issue collides with social media as it is now?
I think the surprising thing here was the 7th of October. It surprised all of us, and the scale of the atrocity. And that was very difficult, I think, to think of Israelis just as victims, as also victims of rapes or of murder and so forth. I mean, it's very difficult, I think, for a lot of people who are used to see Israel as the aggressor and occupier, etc., to do a certain switch and to think, and I think that's, you could really see people struggling with that. In a way, I mean, it is disappointing, and also it doesn't make sense because, any way forward, whatever you think, involves the Israeli society as well. So they have to be part of the equation, and so to pretend that you can shut them out or to imagine them all as evil or lying and so forth is not useful. But also, I think partly it's easy because on the state side, on the official side, the international community, the West is very much clearly on Israel's side and allows, the bombing to go ahead. So people kind of say, well, we'll just take the other side to kind of balance it out. But it just creates Not a helpful discussion.
And can I just add to that I have found it very unsettling that in the UK, as the far left has adopted the pro-Palestinian, but also in some strains of it, the pro-Hamas cause in quite alarming ways. I have also found it very unsettling how the right in this country has seized on anti-Semitism as a way to attack Muslim communities and immigrant communities. And I felt this very strongly with the row over the Armistice Day march. And individuals, I'm not going to name them on this podcast, but everyone knows who they are, but individuals who really didn't care about the Jews in any meaningful way prior to this are now using the Jewish community and saying they're standing up for the Jewish community as a way to pursue Islamophobia. And it's really uncomfortable to be in the middle, to be Jewish and be in the middle of it, and to see the far right kind of adopting that as a cause when you know there's an ulterior motive there.
Well, there seems to be, there is this strange thing that you can be sort of anti-Semitic in one way, but you can be pro-Israel. So you're like Elon Musk was welcomed by Netanyahu days after endorsing the Great Replacement theory. And so there's the kind of thing that some of the people saying that they care about anti-Semitism are then practicing the anti-Semitism just in a different direction.
Yeah, and it feels like...
And have done for a long time.
And it feels like the Jewish community is sort of being held in the middle of this other culture war that isn't really about what's going on in Israel and Gaza at all. And it's quite uncomfortable to have people ostensibly supporting you when they're actually doing a lot of damage and saying things in the name of the Jewish community that are really quite disturbing.
Looking forward a bit, I'm wondering what this does to Israel's standing in the world. That before the war, the BDS movement has had limited success over the last 20 years or so. Many artists and academics refuse to boycott the country. They go, I'm not going to boycott the people, even if I disagree with the government. You still get people going and performing there and going to conferences there. I wonder whether some of those people would find that almost, impossible to make that case in the near future. Do you think that Israel will become more isolated as a result of this war?
Well, it depends on what's going to happen, because if we arrive at a certain stalemate and what happened in Gaza ends up being effectively ethnic cleansing of the north of the Strip and not allowing 1 million people to go back, then that will create that will have an effect, I think, on how Israel is seen. I think already people are reporting kind of more kind of shadow boycotts, the Israeli academia. I don't know how much this is measurable. But the key thing, I think, is BDS is, everybody talks about the academic and the cultural boycott. But in terms of economic impact on Israel, BDS has had no effect whatsoever. Israel has entrenched its occupation. It's transformed into a de facto apartheid situation, and there has been no sanctions, no consequences, nothing. So everybody talks about this academic or this singer. It really doesn't matter.
Right.
And I think that's the key issue. As long as and then on that, I don't know what will happen, but we're in that sense, BDS really failed, and it's not clear to me that it will. It's also not clear to me that it's very easy to apply this kind of pressure because of the nature of Israeli export and economy.
After the fighting, Gaza's obviously going to need governing by somebody or other. It's also going to need extensive rebuilding. Just an extraordinary kind of an extraordinary infrastructure effort to make it habitable again. Who do you think will end up in charge of that? If not, obviously not Hamas, or presumably not Hamas, but who will? Do you expect an Israeli occupation or some kind of Palestinian authority?
There is quite likely outcome of this kind of stalemate for a year, for more, that in which Israel controls the north of the Strip and some kind of anarchy and some kind of counterattacks from the south of the Strip. No reconstruction, and people will not be allowed back. The only other scenario is for Hamas to leave the Strip, I think, and the Hamas leadership as part of a bigger, probably prisoner release deal and resumption of negotiations. It's not a likely, but it's a possible scenario, but that would require a change of government in Israel. It's certainly not going to happen before the next summer. So we're talking about a real immediate humanitarian catastrophe in South Gaza that people are not thinking seriously about. And
there wasn't much of a peace process before October the 7th. And now, obviously, people talk about whether they would prefer a one-state solution, two-state solution, whatever. Is there any kind of peace process, do you think, possible in the short term? Because I suppose what this has proved, in some ways, obviously, it's made everything far, far worse. It has also proved, though, that Netanyahu's, strategy of kind of allying with / containing Hamas hasn't worked. Biden has made, statements to the effect that until you have some kind of peace process, this sort of crisis never ends. Are there avenues or possibilities beyond this stalemate?
I mean, it's a moment of huge shock, and these kind of things create, developments that we can't anticipate. I mean, it happened in 1973, and it's on that scale and even more. So it's impossible to predict. It can go to the worst. I mean, there's still a chance of a regional war, and there is still a chance of the right wing trying to push people in Gaza across the border to Egypt. But it can also go in the way that of a reinvigorated left, maybe, or in the Israeli political map that will call for resumption of negotiation. I think it's clear that, containing the situation and pretending that the Palestinians can be ignored, I think that's clear to everyone that that's no longer possible.
Now, let's have a quick question for one of our Patreon backers in But Your Emails. We've got a But Your Email special coming up on Wednesday, 6th of December, where we'll be answering lots of Patreon questions. To sign up and send yours and make it good. This week, Guy Buckland says, can it ever be justified for a politician to appear on an entertainment show? I don't know what prompted this question. Can it be right for an individual who has spent a career honing their debate, presentation and argumentation skills, it's not about Nigel Farage then, to be allowed to pitch themselves to the public when there is no one sufficiently experienced to cross-examine them? I haven't been watching I'm a Celebrity, so I don't know if that's true and that maybe there is a
deal with it as a general.
A YouTuber or sports person who is, in fact, sufficiently experienced to cross-examine them. Rachel.
Yes.
You think it is okay?
No, I was just... you're
just saying, yes, I am Rachel. Yes, I am Rachel. Is it
justified?
Okay?
Well...
Not in this particular case, maybe, but just ever.
You're not going to stop them, are you?
Why not, though? Surely, because when Hancock went in, right?
Yeah.
I thought, could the Tory party not just go, look, you are not allowed to appear on reality shows as long as you're a sitting MP?
But Nigel Farage is neither a member of the Tory party nor a sitting MP. I think any kind of exploration of how we got here, you want to look not at Nigel Farage or Matt Hancock on I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here. You want to look at Boris Johnson on Have I Got News for You? And you probably want to have a wider conversation about the American politicians who appear on, I'm going to get the names of the shows all wrong, but Saturday Night Live and John Oliver and, come on, someone help me out here. I don't watch them.
Well, of course, Donald Trump and The Apprentice he wasn't a politician then.
Well, I think that's slightly different. I think I think you're going to see more of that, which is celebrities who have a fan base moving into politics. Again, I think if Taylor Swift wanted to run for president, she'd have a pretty good shot at it, which I think is different from...
It'd be amazing if Joe Biden just went, I am not standing after all. Please meet your new candidate, Taylor Swift.
It wouldn't happen like that, obviously, would it?
No, it would.
Be
On stage.
And she would come in on a big wrecking ball and just literally just bash him off
technically
the stage.
Miley Cyrus, who I also think would be better than many of the contenders. I think that's a slightly different question to politicians going on reality TV shows. I think the bigger issue is them not offering themselves up for serious interview. And it used to be the case, I think, that if you wanted to make it in politics, you had to go be interviewed by, I don't know, Andrew Neil or somebody help me out here.
Paxman?
Exactly, no, Paxman. And you had to face the grilling, and sometimes it would be uncomfortable, and you weren't just trying to deal with political issues in little sound bites that were snapped up for Twitter. And Dominic Cummings, obviously with Boris Johnson, said, no, we're not doing any of that. We're not going to put ministers on the Today programme. You know, we can reach the public without that level of scrutiny. If you banned them from going on reality TV shows, they'd just make their own TikToks, wouldn't they? I mean, Matt Hancock's on TikTok, which is terrifying for me.
Well, Nigel Farage's appearance on I'm a Celebrity, apparently they've lost more than 2 million viewers year on year, which is almost more than one viewer for every pound that they paid Nigel Farage. So maybe there is an economic disincentive, but would you just say no? Let's say just MPs where you actually can have some control.
Do you know, I kind of disagree with the premise of the question a little bit, because I think it is imagining a different kind of interviewing journalists that's sufficiently expert to sort of grill these people. And sometimes I have seen people be grilled much more effectively by sort of Big Brother housemates than they have by... Laura Kunsberg or Kay Burley. And so in an environment where actually they can't filibuster their 10 minutes and can be much more effective.
And they can't escape because they're in the jungle.
Yeah, unless they actually go, get me out of here, which is, I think, the format of the game, isn't it? That at any point you can go get me out of here.
You sound like a High Court judge. I believe the format is that the celebrities can say, get me out of here.
Yes, I haven't seen it for so many years.
I think what Alex is suggesting, and I think it's genius, by the way, and we should all trademark it now, is a specifically political version of I'm a politician, get me out of here, where you stick a whole load of high-profile political figures in a setting. Could be a jungle, could be, I don't know, a remote island on northern Scotland or something.
The Arctic base from
exactly.
The Thing.
And you stick them there with some regular voters and, one or two political journalists, and you film them constantly, and you get all those answers out of them that you can't get out of them in your 10-minute segment on Sky News or whatever.
You're making just an interview that never ends.
Exactly.
I really like that. Like, your jungle trial, Boris Johnson, is to spend 15 minutes with this angry bunch of fishermen that you lied to, or this group of Northern Ireland businesses that you said could put the forms in the bin.
And farmers.
And if you don't do it, you don't eat.
Amazing. Right? Amazing television. I think I can get quite banny on this.
You're quite banny generally.
I'm quite
speaking.
banny. I was like, I think the other episode, I was just like,
the worst liberal.
ban think tanks. I will also ban politicians from appearing on an entertainment show. I don't know about the legality of that. I'll look into it.
Well, then we're not going to cut you into our new TV show that we just invented.
This will be the one.
We can host it. It'll be great.
Yeah, the new Endemol.
And that's how I lost £1 million. While Nigel Farage prats around in the jungle, his political brainchild Reform UK seems to be faring a bit better. In some recent polls, they're just a few points behind the Lib Dems, and leader Richard Tice has no intention of helping out the Tories by standing down candidates in the next election, as Farage did with the Brexit Party in 2019. Rachel, you interviewed Tice for the New Statesman recently.
I did. And I can reveal that we had blood orange iced tea.
That's quite nice.
Yeah, it was really nice. Blood orange and hibiscus, I think. It's really good.
That's how they get to you. Client journalist. As a Ramona, I cannot stand the man, but how does he come across? Does he have, political charisma?
Yeah, he really does. In a very different way to Nigel Farage. I mean, the thing that everyone forgets about Nigel Farage is that the reason he has achieved the success towards his mission that he has is because he can connect with people. He's got real charisma, the sort of guy in the pub kind of vibe. Richard Tice isn't like that. He's very much a city posh boy, but he's also very charming and very reasonable. And he sort of laid out all of his policies and what Reform want to do and his plan of how he was going to get there. And I was sitting there thinking, I disagree with virtually all of this, but, I can see what your strategic comms plan is. And I think it is more viable is the wrong word. I think it is something to pay attention to more than is priced in at the moment in the political discourse, because I think people have a tendency to go, oh my goodness, I disagree with all of this so strongly.
Yeah.
Why would we pay any attention to that? And I think we should be paying attention to it because a lot of people are warmer to some of the things that they want to do, particularly attacks on net zero and the cost of net zero in particular, and obviously immigration. And they are going forward with very, very clear messaging in a way that the Conservative Party is trying to, or sort of having an internal fight over. And I think it will be quite effective for them.
I mean, it's not a massive innovation, to be fair. They are cut and pasting things that have worked very, very well on the continent. So basically they're going super right-wing on social stuff and quite left-wing on economic stuff.
Very left-wing on economic stuff.
In many cases, like more left than Labour.
Matthew Goodwin's going to be excited.
Yes. So we know this is a formula that works. We absolutely know this.
Okay, so that's interesting because he calls the Tories con-socialists, which is not... Try again. Not a good one. But, when this is also the party of Suella Braverman and Lee Anderson, do you think that there really is space to the right of this version of the Tory party then?
Well, I don't think the Conservative Party is the party of Suella Braverman and Lee Anderson. I think those individuals are in the party and they are a very vocal wing of it. But everything that you're seeing at the moment with the trouble that Rishi Sunak is having is because there are multiple wings of the Conservative Party and they're all fighting. I mean, he just brought in David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, who is very much not of that wing. And I think the sell for reform is... Yes, there are some individuals in the Tory party, but, they are fighting against the moderates. We don't have to fight anyone. We're very clear in our messaging. And if you are a voter for whom those kind of policies appeal, why would you go for the party that is fighting itself and you don't know whether those individuals are going to be triumphant or not when there's a party that is dedicated specifically to that? I mean, they've also got the benefit of knowing that they're never actually going to be in power and therefore they can go for very simplistic slogans and solutions, whereas Rishi Sunak is actually trying to run a country and it's more complicated. But one thing that sort of struck me when I interviewed Tice is he showed me, he's running to be an MP in Hartlepool, and he showed me a property that he'd bought there, which is on like the roundabout as you go into the town, and he'd painted it bright blue, sky blue, which is the colours of Reform, previously the Brexit Party, and he's just painted the policies onto the side of the wall. So if you're coming into that town, if you're driving in, you just see cut taxes, lower immigration, not stop the boats. I can't remember what the policies are, and I shouldn't be advertising them on this podcast either. But he literally taken the paint it on a bus and put it on a building.
He's not living in this house, presumably.
It's the campaign headquarters.
Oh, okay, sorry. I just thought like I would respect it if he then had to live in that house.
Yeah, I can see Oakshott. Just going to the local Wilco.
Alex, Reform has had a name change. It is now Reform UK : the Brexit Party, like when solo artists have to put their former band names in brackets on the poster to sell tickets. What's the strategy?
I mean, the strategy is that, isn't it?
But
to sell tickets.
But presumably, because obviously Brexit is not that popular, but presumably it's popular with the people they like.
I don't think it's more sophisticated than that. I think reminding people about Brexit works for their demographic. And I think also don't underestimate the amount of revenue they got last time from saying to everyone, anyone that wants to stand for us, 25 quid apply here. It was 50 quid last time. They've cut it to 25 this time. But they generate an enormous amount of revenue from all like the hardcore Brexiters that just want to be part of the movement.
They're playing to the fans, like the people that buy box sets.
Completely.
Like they're not trying to reach the average voter.
I want to politely disagree a little bit on the Tories not being that party. I think they are that party, actually, because I think between two sides, one of whom offers very simple, primary colour solutions, and another side that says, well, it's a lot more complicated than that. I think the simple side will always win in that kind of debate, especially if you have sort of, got your voter constituency used to that kind of populist vibe, which they did through Brexit, and then, get Brexit done was the thing that got them elected last time. And I think if the Conservatives head into opposition, that will be so attractive to do as an opposition, to just go, well, we just send them all back. I mean, the reason it's not working now is because they're in a position to fucking do it. So every time they say, well, just put them on a plane and send them to Rwanda, everyone goes, off you go then. Oh, wait, you can't.
You've done some polling geek work on why Reform's numbers fluctuate so much. Like, how reliable are they?
I mean, this is not a reflection on the polling. It's just statistical fact. The smaller the sample, the bigger the possible variation, especially if you are rounding to whole numbers, right? So, as many companies tend to do. So, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a sample of 1,000 people, and 1 week you have 7.4% rounded down to 7 that say I'm going to vote for Reform. And the next week you have 9.6% rounded up to 10 that say I will vote for Reform. That's a 3% swing. It takes 22 people changing their mind in that sample. So what I'm saying is, in a small sample, a tiny number of people wavering can make massive difference. I have had a look at a really massive poll from our friends at Best for Britain. Now, these figures are raw, and they haven't been weighted yet. They haven't been, checked. But we are talking about a huge sample. They usually use over 25,000 people. And Reform comes in the middle of that range, as you would expect, around about 8%. Okay. And round about 8% is exactly the threshold at which Conservative strategists begin to really worry. It's exactly the sort of level where they can't really make an impact for themselves, but they can really fuck up the Conservatives.
Well, this came up in your piece, Rachel, that Reform may have cost, Ty certainly claims they did, the Tories, the Tamworth and Mid-Vedshire by-elections because of the kind of the difference in the vote there. Why won't he make the kind of deal Farage made in 2019 and stand down? Does he just hate them?
Yeah, essentially. I'll tell you what he said to me, which is, verbatim quote, they could offer me 5 million quid in a peerage and I wouldn't make a deal. Now, I don't know if anyone on TCHQ has offered him 5 million quid in a peerage. They might want to try it. But his position is that he wants to annihilate the Conservatives essentially, completely as a party, and he sees possibly that as the path to proportional representation. So he was talking to me very enthusiastically about a Labour government because the belief is that a Labour government might be more inclined towards voting reform than a Conservative government. And I said, but you're closer to the Tories than you are to Labour. Are you not worried about handing Keir Starmer victory? And he's like, no. So said he wants to teach them a lesson. Now, again, I don't know if the offer was on the table, whether there might be more negotiation. They also claim, by the way, that there wasn't a deal last time round. They just decided that the strategy, the aim of getting Brexit done, that was enough that they would stand down in Conservative seats. So as not to hinder that.
Did you buy that?
That there wasn't a deal? Yeah. I don't think there was ever anything written down.
No, I don't know. I'm not. Yeah, obviously, because they didn't get anything in return.
Yeah, they didn't get anything in return. And I think there is anger at how the Conservative Party has done Brexit or not done Brexit in those years. And I also think there's sort of awareness that if you want to build a political brand, getting lots of attention by attacking the Conservatives is a good way to do it.
That's how we do it. Reformers deny trying to bribe Lee Anderson to switch parties, but they have been courting Tory MPs. Now, back in 2014, defectors to UKIP were a huge boost, and even though there were only two of them, that did help move Cameron towards the EU referendum. Does reform need defections in order to kind of step up a level?
Well, the thing that gave them a lot of attention when they were the Brexit party was they essentially won the European elections in May 2019. They were they got the most votes. And now that we don't have European elections anymore, why don't we have European elections anymore? We should really look into that. They don't have as many opportunities to make a stand that way and say, look, in these elections, these are the votes that we got. But there's more than one way of getting attention. I don't see the prospect of high-profile Conservative defections, not least because there's already this the next leadership contest to replace Rishi Sunak is kind of happening already, and Conservative MPs either they're going to lose their seats or they want to be around for that so that they can help shape the party and choose the next leader. But what you might see is if it's a very devastating defeat, then you might see some former Conservative MPs who have lost their seats moving into the reform space and possibly some kind of fracturing of the Conservative brand. But again, I don't think that is the aim. I think the aim is to just keep agitating from the right and work with parties. They're working with the Lib Dems, they're working with the Greens, they're working with the SNP and other smaller parties on voting reform as a key issue. And that is, I think, where they see the biggest chance of progress.
That's interesting that they are working with these parties.
They're working with Make Votes Matter, which works with all of the parties.
Okay. So obviously those parties have some disagreements.
Yes.
Amongst themselves. And, the radical right always seems like the strongest argument against PR. What's happened in the Netherlands has made people very nervous. I mean, it's quite complicated because Geert Wilders hasn't been able to form a government yet. But I mean, is that something that sort of hurts the PR cause if you've got Richard Tice being a loud champion and then you suddenly think, oh, this would entrench a radical right, he probably doesn't consider it that, but, party in the political landscape and in the Commons?
I mean, I don't know, to be honest, because it depends on on your philosophical take or on whether if there's a chunk of the electorate that wants X, whether it's better for that to be expressed in a democratic way or not expressed. Because it seems to me that a two-party system, in the same way that the presidential elections in France have worked, it's almost like a dare to the far right to see how far you can go before they actually become the ruling party, right? So we're not talking about, the stakes are a lot higher. We're not talking about 17% and having to form a coalition with another 4 parties in Holland, which means in practice that the vast majority of his policies will be neutered effectively. He will be gentrified as he goes into government, as we have seen time and again when, smaller radical parties have to coalesce. So what you're doing is playing this very high-stakes game that's all or nothing. That's saying we'll keep pissing people off until they actually elect a Richard Tice government. Like with an absolute majority, which seems to me quite a risky strategy.
How does this work in Israeli politics then, where it seems to have brought in some very extreme characters into cabinet?
I mean, yes, that's true. I mean, it's not a panacea. I mean, it's a pretty unique constellation. I mean, I think it's Netanyahu's legal problems, the fact that he's charged with corruption that made him do that. He really refrained from doing it before. Right. So I think it's Israel's other constitutional issues that led there. The fact that there is no constitution is partly what led there. I think, I mean, again, as someone who grew up in a country with a proportional system, first past the poll seems to me a profoundly anti-democratic principle. I mean, it's not, the fact that if you have a majority in a certain area, you can get representation like the SNP, but if you have even larger in the whole country, you don't get, seems to me just can't be defended. And I think we're talking all this is about hypothetical for the future, but it's already happened here. Brexit.
Yeah.
So it's already happened.
And that was part of that dare, wasn't it, of saying you can't do anything about it. It'll be centre-right and centre-left forever. And the first time people had an opportunity actually to express dissatisfaction with that, in however wrong-minded a way, they went for it.
We've almost reached the end of the show, so it's time to talk about the stories that have gone under the radar this week. Alex?
So I know it's weird, but my under the radar this week is PMQs on Wednesday, because we haven't talked about that today.
Everyone watches PMQs, Alex.
No, they don't.
Millions.
People see a few highlights, I think, on the 10 o'clock news, but if you watched the entirety of PMQs on Wednesday.
Can I say that I not only watched it, but I reviewed it for the New Statesman?
Well, there you go.
Continue, Alex.
I'm curious to see if you agree. It seemed to me a really new low for Sunak. He just seemed utterly beaten. He looked like he was about to cry at times. The entire opposition benches were just laughing at him. The benches behind him were deathly silent. He just seemed utterly, utterly defeated. I have never seen, had it been a boxing fight, someone would have thrown in the towel.
It's very sad. I hope he's okay.
So mine is the end of indefinite jail sentences, which is criminal justice, not a particularly sexy issue, but a really important one. So over 1,800 offenders who have been released on licence, but they were serving these indefinite sentences, IPP they're called, imprisonment for public protection, have had those sentences terminated. And basically, this was something that was brought in and it was meant to be for the most serious crimes. And thousands of offenders were given it for relatively minor offences, which means that you have people who are serving indefinite sentences longer for sort of minor crimes like armed burglary than for murder that were committed since then. And criminal justice reform is a hugely important issue, and the overcrowding in our prisons is hugely important. I've just done a big interview on this for the New Statesman with Chris Atkins, prison reformer, and this is actually good news. And I very rarely get to talk about positive criminal justice stories, so this is one of them. It's a complex issue, but go read about it because it is actually really important.
Cool. Yeah.
The ongoing massacres in West Darfur, which almost get no mention. We're talking about this November. We're talking about around 1,000 of people murdered, and tens of thousands of refugees in Chad. There's already 500,000 from Darfur in Chad because it started in April. And that's the Rapid Support Forces, who are one faction in the civil war with the Sudanese armed forces, and it's the Rapid Support Forces who are committing ethnic cleansing and massacres. And yes, it's surprising how little of this gets reported. I mean, I only know it because I follow a few people who write on Sudan on Twitter. So I guess Twitter still has a purpose in that sense. But yeah, it's an ongoing civil war that, with millions of refugees and so many casualties.
Yeah, they say weirdly underreported. And that's the show. Thank you so much to Alex Andreou.
My pleasure.
Rachel Cunliffe.
Thank you.
And our guest, Yair Wallach.
Thank you.
Stick around for the extra bit after Demonism Monster by Corner Shop, and a salute to our generous supporters. You can join them and get the podcast early and without ads, plus bonus good stuff. Search Oh God What Now Patreon to find out how, and don't forget about our Christmas shop at podmarket.co.uk.